Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. Hi Nan.
Hi Steve.
Well, we did a great episode last week about film noir.
Well, we think it's great.
Well, we think it's great. Well, some of you do too, because we got some great feedback about how much you enjoyed our take on what is film noir. Well,
yes.
You're in luck, because we're going to continue that in a 3-part series. And so this week, we're going to dive into our second part of what is film noir. And this is where we get into what I like to call strange characters.
Yes. and it's so interesting, the archetypes that come out of this genre of film. We've got the anti-hero / protagonist.
Yep.
The femme fatale.
Oh, yes.
The villain, of course. The good girl. I love your description of this next one. The slick weasel.
The slick weasel, one of my favorite tropes.
Yep. The corrupt politician or the corrupt cop.
Yep.
And, of course, the redemptive female.
Yes, always. And, there were some redemptive men, too, but primarily it was the female characters that saw redemption, I think, in film noir, which is really fun.
Let's talk about a typical storyline in film noir.
A typical storyline, imagine, if you will, say it's midnight. Downtown Los Angeles, rain-soaked streets, they glitter with this mist that rises from the pavement. Can you see it? Can you see it?
I'm there, baby.
All right, there's the long shadow of a man stretches across the sidewalk like a snake. His face is hidden in the shadows. He dashes into a smoke-filled bar. He gets lost in the crowd as 2 men in silhouette with guns follow him. Now, that could be the setup for about 10,000 film noir movies.
Yes,
It's
sure
always
can.
moody and spooky and interesting and shadowy and just incredible.
It usually involves a man, often a detective or a cop, that has a shady past, a questionable moral compass,
Yes.
who ends up meeting a beautiful, sexy, mysterious woman. He is lured into her web by her sex appeal. He's often fatally attracted to her because of her shady lifestyle or through her manipulation. She lures him into something illegal or immoral or both, and often involves getting rid of another man who stands in the way, usually a husband or a lover. There's a plan, a plot, cover up, and then, of course, there's that weaselly, opportunistic man who tries to expose them, and he has to be dealt with, ultimately leading to the destruction of our man, although not always.
Yeah.
There's often another woman, a friend, a coworker, a girlfriend of high moral character and infinite patience who either helps him get out of the jam or is waiting to pick up the pieces when our guy has crashed and burned.
And that's great because, that's typical storyline. It really introduces us to many of the mainstay characters of film noir.
Right.
Like you just mentioned, it really introduces us to the protagonist, the femme fatale, the slick weasel, the good girl, a lot of the great characters of film noir.
Right.
And a great film noir that contains most of these prototype characters is, and it's one of my favorites, Born to Kill, 1947. It's a story of a calculating divorcee played by the incredible Claire Trevor.
She's amazing in that film.
So good in this. And she risks her chance of wealth and security with a decent man she doesn't love, played by Philip Terry, by getting involved with a hot-headed murderer, played by Lawrence Tierney, who romances her foster sister, played by Audrey Long. Along the way, there's a blackmailing detective, played by Walter Slezak, and a weaselly sidekick, always a weaselly sidekick, played by Elisha Cook Jr. I mean, who could ask for more?
Yeah. Side note, Claire, come on. Really? You didn't see that Lawrence Tierney was good trouble from the start? But that's also part of the film noir world.
The ladies like those bad boys.
Yeah, they do. Let's talk about an actual definition of what an anti-hero is, our first character type that we're going to talk about. It's actually a protagonist who lacks the qualities of a conventional hero. So this person would lack the morals, the courage, or the selflessness that we often associate with our heroes. Anti-heroes heroes often also feel rejected by society and veer down a self-destructive path that most often results in either isolation or death.
Definitely they're flawed men. They're usually loners. They do things the hard way. They're driven by their own moral compass, which doesn't necessarily align with that of society.
Yeah.
Which makes it really interesting, a little dicey sometimes. And I think in film noirs, our protagonist usually comes from the shadier side of life and is often a detective or a cop, like we mentioned. And our anti-hero's instincts and moral character are continually being tested. He's attacked, he's beaten up, he's threatened, he's persecuted, and often charged with a crime he didn't commit. So it's up to his fortitude and intelligence and his street smart savvy to just get him out of it. He'll come out on the other side either a changed man, either safely and uncorrupted, or dead. Those seem to be the options.
Some of the best portrayals of anti-heroes in the noir genre have come in the form of pulp fiction detectives like Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe. In The Maltese Falcon, 1941, Humphrey Bogart's Sam Spade is seemingly emotionless and cynical. Even after the murder of his partner, Sam Spade keeps his feelings in check and he focuses on the case at hand. He's really the epitome of stoic cynicism. And yet, he manages to be seduced by the alluring charms of Bridget O'Shaughnessy, played by Mary Astor. However, his streetwise survival mechanisms do allow him to wise up. While he may be tempted, he ultimately does the right thing. And he sends her double-crossing ass to the slammer.
Yes, he does.
Dick Powell's Philip Marlowe also shares a lot of similar traits in Murder, My Sweet, 1944. Now, he manages to solve a jewel theft, he disposes of an evil stepmother, and he ends up with a good girl. So that is noir perfection.
That is noir perfection. Some of the greatest protagonists have been cops seeking revenge. My favorite, obviously, is Glenn Ford in The Big Heat. Perfect example of that. Or they're jaded detectives like Dana Andrews and Laura. But our anti-heroes have also been truck drivers like George Raft and Humphrey Bogart in They Drive by Night, or Richard Conte in Thieves Highway, 1949. They've also been boxers. I think about John Garfield in Body and Soul and Burt Lancaster as the Swede in The Killers and Robert Ryan in The Setup. And they've also been, and this is one of my favorite classifications of the anti-hero, they're upstanding citizens but with a dark past. And a perfect example of this for me is Van Heflin in Act of Violence. They've also been carnival workers who could forget Tyrone Power in Nightmare Alley. Or they're even screenwriters. William Holden in Sunset Boulevard, Humphrey Bogart in A Lonely Place. So they come from all aspects of life.
Okay, quick question. Right off the top of your head, who's your favorite actor that plays the anti-hero in film noir?
It's Humphrey Bogart, hands down, because nobody did it better.
No.
And probably in A Lonely Place. Yeah.
That's great.
I love that performance. I love that movie. I love him.
Well, our next character type is the femme fatale, and talk about a classic film noir element. The emergence of film noir redefined women's roles in crime dramas.
They really did.
I mean, in a good way.
Yeah.
In the past, female characters' sole purpose was to support the male hero, usually as their wife or their girlfriend.
Boring.
I know, right? Who wants to play that? These women were pure of heart and morally righteous, but as the movie themes got darker, so did the hearts of some of these female characters.
And then it got good.
Providing incredible roles for actresses and giving birth to the femme fatale. She's cunning, she's manipulative, she's ruthless, and she's an essential part of most film noirs. She is beautiful. She understands her sexual attractiveness, and she uses it often as a weapon to ensnare men into her trap. Now, often these spider women are a victim of the patriarchy, which is such a great point. And they are driven to murder or crime as their only escape from their miserable lives. Usually, they convince some poor chump to come along for the ride, and that usually ends up being their demise.
Yes. There's so many great portrayals of femme fatales in film noirs, but I don't think there's a better one than Barbara Stanwyck as Phyllis Dietrichson in Billy Wilder's 1944 masterpiece, Double Indemnity. With her garish blonde hair and those big red lips and that ankle bracelet.
Yes.
She's trapped in this very dull marriage to Tom Powers, and she wants out. So when Walter Neff, played by Fred McMurray, who's a sucker for women and money. When he shows up to sell her husband some life insurance, well, good old Phyllis sees her chance and takes it. And she sweeps Walter up into the rapids of her manipulation and treachery. And we all know how that turned out.
Yeah. While Stanwyck's Phyllis is a seemingly everyday bored housewife, some other femme fatale sisters come from entirely different worlds. Again, back to the Maltese Falcon, 1941, Mary Astor's Bridget O'Shaughnessy passes herself off as a woman of class and culture. But under the mink, she is a cold-hearted, greedy spider willing to use all of her feminine charms to get what she wants.
Don't mess with Bridget. Some femme fatales do have redeeming qualities, and they can garner actual sympathy from the viewing public. Others, not so much.
Right.
And these women are so cold-hearted and so treacherous that they are beyond redemption. A great example of this, Leave Her to Heaven, 1945. Jean Tierney's character of Ellen, she manages to let her husband's teenage brother drown. He's played by Daryl Hickman. She throws herself down a flight of stairs to force a miscarriage, and she even poisons herself to set up her husband, played by Cornell Wilde, and her sister, played by Jean Crane, for her murder.
There is no one more evil than Jean Tierney in that film.
She might take the prize for the most evil.
Yeah.
And in Orson Welles' The Lady from Shanghai, 1947, Rita Hayworth's character is no better. With calculated evil, she seduces Michael O'Hara, played by Orson Welles, who's this chumpy Irish sailor who she tries to manipulate into killing her older, crippled husband, Arthur, played by Everett Sloane.
Well, no discussion of the femme fatale would be complete without a nod to Jane Greer's double-crossing Kathy Moffat in Out of the Past, 1947, or Joan Bennett's cruel and deceitful Kitty March in Scarlet Street, 1947, or, of course, Lana Turner's deadly blonde Cora in The Postman Always Rings Twice, 1946. And was there anyone more wretched than Anne Savage's vicious blackmailer Viera in Detour, 1945, or Elizabeth Scott's duplicitous singer Coral Chandler in Dead Reckoning, 1947.
Oh, evil, just wretched, all of them. But you know what? One of my favorites was Yvonne DiCarlo. She played the sexy ex-wife of Burt Lancaster in Crisscross, 1949. And also Ava Gardner's wickedly alluring Kitty Collins in The Killers, 1946, not to be missed. And you cannot do a list of femme fatales and not mention Peggy Cummins' gun-toting woman, Anna Laurie, in Gun Crazy from 1950. And also there was a series of, I call them lusty housewives. The ones that come into mind are Marie Windsor Sherry in The Killing, 1956, and Ida Lupino's Lana from They Drive By Night, 1940. And I'm even going to throw in Helen Walker's Irene from Impact, 1949.
All right, quick question. Favorite actress playing femme fatale off the top of your head?
Oh, God.
Who comes to mind?
It has to be Barbara Stanwyck, Double Indemnity.
That's what I think, yeah. Has to
Just
be.
has to be.
Yeah.
But Mary Astor's a really close second.
Yeah. All right, let's move to the good girl.
Yeah.
Now, for every scheming, seducing femme fatale in film noir, there's usually a good girl counterpart. While she may not be as exciting or glamorous as the femme fatale, she does play a vital role in the genre. She is often the one who provides redemption or salvation to our hero who has lost his way. She represents what is good and pure and just in life. Now, the good girl is usually unyieldingly loyal, loving, forgiving, and patient. She is of good character and virtue and is often the port in the storm once our hero has gotten in too deep. Many times she's also the savior.
Yes.
And often when pushed to their limit, these women often betray their own moral compass to save their man.
Yes, I love that. I love that. The epitome of the good girl in film noir, it's got to be Colleen Gray. I mean, I don't think anybody played more good girls in film noirs than Colleen Gray. She was just incredible. In Kiss of Death, 1947, she plays Nettie, the loyal woman who used to babysit the children of Victor Mature, who believes in him and helps him. And even though he's a criminal, she thinks he can be redeemed. In Nightmare Alley, 1947, she plays Molly, a carnival performer married to a shady carnival barker played by Tyrone Power. And in the end, she ends up saving his life by nurturing him through his alcoholism and his inner demons. And then as Helen, the law student daughter of the mastermind of a bank heist, played by Preston Foster in Kansas City Confidential, she saves disgraced delivery driver Joe Rolfe, played by John Payne, from being taken to the jungles of the Bahamas and killed. That's when a good girl comes in handy. Save you from the Bahamas jungles being killed.
Well, sometimes the good girl must sit by helplessly as the man she loves gets caught up in a web of trouble, usually involving that darn femme fatale.
Oh, just a fly in the ointment.
A great example of this is in John M. Stahl's 1945 classic, Leave Her to Heaven. We just talked about it. In this film, the sweet, sympathetic Ruth, played by Jean Crane, has the misfortune of falling in love with Richard, played by Cornell Wilde, the husband of her rotten-to-the-core sister Ellen, played by Jean Tierney. After several suspicious family accidents, Ruth finally confronts her sister, and this confrontation ends up being the catalyst for Richard to finally realize the truth about his murderous wife, ultimately saving him from a dangerous, obsessive love.
One of my favorite film noir good girls, and also one of my favorite human beings on this planet, is Anne Martin in the Anthony Mann directed film Raw Deal from 1948. Of course, Anne is played to perfection by Marcia Hunt, and she plays a legal caseworker who's been visiting her client, who's convict Joe Sullivan, played by Dennis O'Keefe, while he's in prison. She partly visits to prep his case, and partly because she's developed feelings for him, and she believes he can be reformed. Well, with the help of his mall girlfriend Pat, played by the femme fatale goddess Claire Trevor, Joe escapes from prison and takes Anne hostage, thrusting her into this very warped love triangle. And believing in Joe and wanting to help him, Anne saves his life once by gunning down the mobster, played by John Ireland, sent to kill him. However, ultimately, she's not able to save him.
Sometimes the good girl is the one who saves our hero from falsely being accused of something he didn't do. There's no better example of this than in Phantom Lady, 1944, when architect Steve Henderson, played by Alan Curtis, is wrongly accused of strangling his wife. It's his intrepid secretary, Carol, played by Ella Raines, who also happens to be secretly in love with him, and she comes to the rescue. Carol puts on her detective hat. She even goes undercover as a bad girl. I mean, she really risks her life in this film.
Yes, she does.
To solve the murder and save Steve from the electric chair.
This film, it's so worth watching, if nothing else, for that scene where Elisha Cook Jr. seduces Ella Raines with a jazzy drum solo.
Yes, and he goes nuts.
He goes crazy.
It has to be him playing, too. It's got to be.
Is. Yeah, because I don't know how they would fake that.
Yeah, I don't either.
Speaking of good girls, I have some favorites.
Okay.
You just can't talk about good girls and not mention, well, Lily Palmer. She played the boxer's patient girlfriend Peg in Body and Soul, 1947, with John Garfield. And I also had a special place in my heart for Virginia Christine, who played Burt Lancaster's former girlfriend in The Killers in 1946. And then Alice Faye as the innocent June Mills in Fallen Angel, 1945. Kathy O'Donnell as Kichi, the sweet young wife, in They Live by Night, 1948. So many more. Just such a great, great character for film noir.
Okay, favorite good girl?
Oh, gosh. Favorite good girl? You know what? I'm going to go with Kathy O'Donnell from Kichi, They Live by Night.
Nice.
So sweet, so innocent, but just dealing with the corruption around her as best she can.
Yeah.
While trying to keep your moral compass. Yeah.
Well, before we get into the other character types, let's hear this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
Well, the pop quiz question of the day, of course, is going to involve film noir. And the question is, as we all know, Sam Spade is a very famous film noir character, played famously by Humphrey Bogart in The Maltese Falcon. Who was the first actor to ever portray Sam Spade in film, and what was the name of the film?
Great question. We'll be right back with that and more about film noir after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. The very first film noir release is widely believed to be 1940's Stranger on the Third Floor. It was directed by Boris Inkster. It starred Peter Lorre and John McGuire. It was an RKO Radio Pictures release. It's about a man who's the key witness in a murder trial. His evidence that he saw the accused man standing over the body of another man in a diner is instrumental in having that man found guilty. But come to find, he may have been wrong about that suspect. Well, it didn't win many good reviews. The staff writer at Variety wrote, Boris Inkster's direction is too studied and when original, lacks the flair to hold attention. It's a film too arty for average audiences and too humdrum for others. The Chicago Reader wrote, the director, Boris Inkster, is better with shadows than with his actors. Another film reviewer, P.S. Harrison, wrote that, quote, at the film's conclusion, one feels as if one has gone through a nightmare. Still, time has been kind to the movie. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 86% today. And now, back to Stephen Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everyone. Before we get into more characters in Film Noir, we wanted to give a shout out to this week's Listener of the Week, Michael Sharp. Thank you so much for your email and for listening and for liking and all the things that you do for our podcast, and also for your great idea about doing an episode of Broadway actors who just couldn't make that transition to film.
I love that topic, and be on the lookout. That might be popping up in the future.
Yeah, I love that too.
Getting back to our character types of film noir, the next character type is a really compelling and interesting one, and it's the anti-villain, which is an interesting term. What this means, and don't get me wrong, the anti-villain is still a villain, but unlike the pure evil villains in most film noir movies, he's actually kind of likable.
You're sort of root for him a little bit.
Yeah, you kind of, and he's charming, and he actually has some redeeming qualities, and he may even set out to do good, but some deep character flaw changes his intentions. So you have a little sympathy for him. And I think the anti-villain's desired end goals may be selfish and bring dangerous results to others, but the anti-villain doesn't care about that as long as he gets what he wants. And that's sort of what defines the character or the type.
A great example of this, of course, is Cody Jarrett, brilliantly played by James Cagney in White Heat 1949, directed by Raoul Walsh. Now, this is the power of Cagney's performance that makes us want to like him, but we know he is so bad.
So evil.
I mean, he's twisted. He's ruthless. He's homicidal.
Yeah.
And he's probably insane.
He's probably insane. Yeah.
Maybe a psychopath.
Yeah.
He's also smart and cunning, and he distrusts everybody except the solace that he gets from his mommy, which is a little weird.
Something's not right there.
Something's a bit sad and strange. We see these psychological elements that made Cody bad. So it allows us to feel sympathy for him by that climactic end, so famous when he yells, "Made it, Ma, top of the world," before being blown to smithereens when the gas tank he's standing on explodes.
Well, you can see the damage that mother did to him. So I think that's why we have sympathy for that character. And that's a great example of the anti-villain. Another great anti-villain was Richard Widmark, who played the sadistic Tommy Udo in Kiss of Death, 1947. Now, he portrays one of the nastiest villains in film noir history. Can anyone ever forget him shoving a wheelchair-bound Mildred Donnick down a flight of stairs? I mean, that is pure evil.
Yes, it is.
Richard Widmark also gives us one of the great anti-villain performances in the form of Harry Fabian in Night in the City from 1950, which is directed by Jules Dassin. Harry is certainly a rascal, and he does bad things to serve himself. I mean, he's a thief, he's a liar, he even tries to steal money from his girlfriend's purse, played by Gene Tierney. But he's also extremely charming and incredibly likable, even though we wouldn't trust him as far as we could throw him. Realizing his gambling addiction motivates much of his criminal activity, this gives us some insight into Harry, and it makes us a little sympathetic. It's only when Harry's facing death at the end of the film that he tries to do a genuinely selfless thing.
There's another fascinating anti-villain in the classic Maltese Falcon, in Casper Fatman Gutman, played with devilish charm by Sidney Greenstreet. You really do just love him.
You love him, even though he's evil.
He's suave, he's sophisticated, and he seems reasonable, right? He's even humorous. He really is a charming guy. However, beneath it all is a sinister mastermind who will do anything to get his hands on the Maltese Falcon statue. His charm and humor actually do, though, stay with him to the end. When Fat Man decides to sell out his own thug, Wilmer, played by Elisha Cook Jr., let's give a listen to the great Sidney Greenstreet.
Well, Wilmer, I'm sorry indeed to lose you, but I want you to know I couldn't be fonder of you if you were my own son. But, well, if you lose a son, it's possible to get another. There's only one Maltese Falcon. When you're young, you simply don't understand these things.
classic, right?
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Okay, favorite anti-villain.
Oh, that's tough. But I got to go with Richard Widmark in Night in the City.
Okay.
He's just such a rascal and so devilishly charming, but he does bad things. So.
Yeah.
But you love him, sort of, but you hate him. Yeah.
All right, good choice.
The next character of film noir is a unique character, and this is the bad girl turned good, or the redemptive character. And we talked a little bit about that at the top, but in film noir, there can be many gray areas in terms of female characters and their moral compass. While many bad girls of film noir are just bad to the bone, that's not always the case. Just because a woman may live on the wrong side of the tracks, is involved with seedy characters, or may even do illegal or immoral things, it doesn't mean she can't have a change of heart and find redemption. Now, usually in film noir, her decision to do the right thing is to help or save the protagonist, and often just in the nick of time. And this is our redemptive woman.
And sometimes they lose their own life in the process.
Oh, yeah.
One of the best is Debbie Marsh, portrayed by another noir goddess, Gloria Graham.
Yes.
In Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, 1953, she is the girlfriend of mobster Vince Stone, played by Lee Marvin. Vince is part of a criminal circuit that controls the town of Kenport. Debbie is drawn to our protagonist, Dave, played by Glenn Ford, which gets her a scalding pot of coffee thrown in her face by Lee Marvin, scarring her. She decides to help Glenn Ford find out who killed his wife and who's behind the city's corruption. In the end, it's Debbie who busts the case wide open by killing a cop's widow, Jeanette Nolan, who is, talk about bad, who has incriminating evidence about the local mob boss and the corrupt city officials. Of course, her heroic action, Debbie's, comes at a price, and ultimately Gloria Graham, well, spoiler alert, we won't give that away. But anyway, it doesn't end well.
Does not end well, but a great example of that. You know, another good example of the redemptive female occurs in Joseph H. Lewis's film, The Big Combo from 1955. The character of Susan Lowell is played by Jean Wallace, and she's another gangster's moll who has a change of heart. Now, Susan is emotionally vulnerable, and she's even suicidal at the beginning of the film. As her sadistic boyfriend, Mr. Brown, Richard Conte, is pursued by Lieutenant Diamond, played by Cornell Wilde, Susan begins to learn that Mr. Brown is worse than anything she ever imagined. She also starts to fall for Lieutenant Diamond, which causes all kinds of complications. And when she finally sees the light about Mr. Brown, she takes the opportunity to literally seize the light, which is a flashlight in this case, onto a cop car, and temporarily blinds Brown during a big shootout with the police and saves Lieutenant Diamond. I mean, this leads to, of course, to Mr. Brown's capture. Another
Great bad girl who redeems herself in the end is Candy, played by Jean Peters in Samuel Fuller's Pickup on South Street, 1953.
Oh, one of my all-time favorite redemptive females.
Now, she isn't evil exactly. She's a grifter in New York City who does bad things. But when she gets involved in an espionage scheme that could leak U.S. secrets to Russia, she finds her moral compass. Even bad girls have their limits, right?
Right.
In the end, she and fellow conman Skip McCoy, played by Richard Widmark, help end the espionage. They leave the police station to start a new life for themselves. And while there's no guarantee that they won't be back to their old con ways, we can at least hope, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
Such a great performance.
Favorite redemptive woman?
You know what? I think, well, Gloria Graham pops to mind first in The Big Heat.
That would be mine.
Jean Peters is a really close second.
Yeah.
She's so good in that
Good
film.
choice.
The next character of film noir that I wanted to talk about was, we talked about him earlier, the slick weasel, as I like to call him. He's an essential character type in film noir. He's usually good looking, with sex appeal. He's often the guy who interferes with the protagonist and a woman, whether the woman is the femme fatale or the good girl. And as his name might suggest, he's slick, he's flashy, and he's quick-tempered with an oily film of sleaze. I mean, he'll embezzle from your grandmother. He'll romance a rich widow. He will blackmail his boss. He will say he will do whatever he has to do to get the job done.
Or stay alive.
Or stay alive, exactly. And he's not bright enough to be the head of the gang, but he's always looking for a side deal or trying to figure out how to blackmail someone on the side for his personal gain. Usually in film noir, he gets his just desserts in the end.
Now, one of the best and we've talked about him a lot, is Dan Duryea. Whether shaking down deadly housewife Elizabeth Scott in Too Late for Tears, 1949, or blackmailing Edward G. Robinson and Joan Bennett in The Woman in the Window, 1944, or trying to frame his girlfriend, Dorothy Lamour, for murder in Manhandled, 1949. He's right up there in the Weasel Hall of Fame.
Oh, he's totally the Weasel Hall of Fame.
And he plays that character in other genres as well. I mean, I think about the Little Foxes.
I was going to say the Little Foxes.
Yeah.
He's the Weasley younger brother.
Yeah.
The sexy brute is a variation of the slick weasel. And this is personified perfectly by Steve Cochran, who made a career out of playing this sexy brute type character.
Right.
But perhaps his most Weasley of all characters was when Steve Cochran played Big Ed in White Heat, which we talked about earlier from 1949 with James Cagney. And once Cagney's Cody Jarrett, once he's sent back to prison, Big Ed wastes no time in reorganizing the gang, seducing Cody's girlfriend Verna, played by Virginia Mayo, and taking over. But as predicted, it does not end well for Big Ed.
Another great slick weasel appears in Hal B. Wallace's Technicolor noir Desert Fury, 1947, when racketeer Eddie Bendix, played by John Hodiak, comes to a small desert town in Nevada. He immediately gets noticed by Paula Heller, played by Elizabeth Scott, the impetuous daughter of a hardened casino owner, Fritzy, played by Mary Astor. Unbeknownst to Paula, Eddie and Fritzy once had a fling.
Wow.
Eddie is slick, he's sexy, he's manipulative, he puts a wedge between mother and daughter, and has a very mysterious past. We all know in film noir films, when a charming, sexy stranger has a mysterious past, it's not a good thing.
No.
It's never good. And true to form, his dark secrets are revealed. He's shown to be a total louse, sending Paula into the arms of the town sheriff, Tom Hansen, played by Burt Lancaster. All right, favorite sleazy weasel.
Dan Duryea, hands down, in any of his movies.
Yes. I mean, Elisha Cook would be...
Oh, he's a good runner-up, but nobody did it better than Dan Duryea.
Yeah.
Nobody. And now the last film noir character we're going to talk about, it's a fun one. It's the blackmailer and the extortionist.
You gotta have that.
You gotta have it. Where would film noir be without blackmailers or extortionists? I mean, think about it. I mean, these despicable acts seem to be a common theme of the genre. Blackmail or extortion can manipulate any situation, increase the stakes, and cause normal people to do crazy things. It's usually a device used in film noir narrative to motivate the plot or further complicate an already complex situation, and the schemer behind the blackmail or extortion are an assorted bunch. While they may come from all walks of life, all shapes and all sizes, they have one thing in common: greed.
Yep. In the classic noir The Big Sleep, 1946, there seem to be a few blackmailers and extortionists who throw a wrench in the path of Detective Philip Marlowe, played by Humphrey Bogart, as he tries to decipher the truth about the dysfunctional family of General Sternwood, played by Charles Waldron. A catalyst in the complex plot is Joe Brody, played by Louis Jean Height. Brody is a gambler who has incriminating photos of Sternwood's daughter Carmen, played by Martha Vickers, and is blackmailing her. He is shot and killed by an unknown assailant. Then there's also Harry Jones, played by Elisha Cook Jr.
Boy, he is all over the place.
He is, who tries to extort money from Marlowe for an address to a missing witness. He gets fatally poisoned. Finally, as the truth of the convoluted plot finally reveals itself, there's Eddie Mars, John Ridgely, who has been blackmailing Vivian Sternwood, played by Lauren Bacall, to keep the secret of a murder her sister committed. Whew, that is a lot of blackmail and extortion for just one film.
It really is. But don't think that blackmail and extortion is just for the men of film noir. Oh, no, no, no. Some of the more evil culprits have been women. Take Viera, played by Anne Savage, for example, in Detour, 1945. When she accepts a ride from a piano player named Al Roberts, played by Tom Neal, she quickly learns that he's not who he says he is, and in fact, he accidentally killed the true owner of the car he's driving. She uses this information to blackmail him into accompanying her on a crime spree with deadly results. The ending of this film still makes my jaw hit the floor, and I won't spoil it.
Another great blackmailer of film noir is the mysterious Mrs. Hammond, played by Gail Sondergaard, in The Letter, 1940. Leslie, played by Betty Davis, is the wife of a rubber plantation manager. She shoots Jeff Hammond, Gail Sondergaard's husband, because he tried to make love to her. That is in quotes.
Definitely in quotes.
She's acquitted at the trial blackmail, but she's not acquitted in the eyes of Hammond's widow. Mrs. Hammond knows the truth and has love letters between Leslie and her husband to prove it. She quietly blackmails Leslie for $10,000 in exchange for the letters. She makes Leslie deliver the money in person and humiliates her by having her pick up the incriminating letters at her feet while she glares down in disgust.
Ooh, nobody does it like
Nobody
her.
can give a look like Gil Sondergaard.
Nobody
right?
can cut an eye like Gil Sondergaard.
In the end, Betty Davis's character gets what is coming to her at the hands of the unforgiving Mrs. Hammond.
I love it. And while these are the most significant character types in film noir that have sort of haunted the flickering celluloid images of the genre, there's many more. I mean, we didn't even talk about the snitch or the corrupt politician, the dirty cop, or the hooker with a heart of gold. So there's many other character types too that we could have talked about, but we just chose the ones that I think are the most prevalent here. So that concludes our second part of our film noir series. So make sure you listen next week as we wrap it up with part 3, where we get into dialogue and other creative aspects of the genre.
Let's remind listeners of this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
So the question was, who was the first actor to portray Detective Sam Spade in a film noir, and what was the movie? Any takers? It's a good one. The first actor to play Sam Spade was Ricardo Cortez, and it was in the original version of The Maltese Falcon, 1931. So yes, folks, there was one before the famous one with Humphrey Bogart, and that was directed by Roy Del Ruth.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We would love it if you would follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And we love hearing from you. Please keep those emails coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor, Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher, John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.